It is continuing to look like once we hit the election day, the pandemic is probably going to be effectively as disastrous as it is in terms of everyday impact on Americans' lives as it does now. And that means that a lot of Americans are going to be choosing to vote via mail-in ballots. But your ability to do so might in some states end up coming down to your age, a consideration not many people are thinking about. Well, joining us now as a guest is going to break down this current legal battle. The Executive Director and Chief Counsel of Equal Citizens, Jason Harrow, welcome back to the Damage Report.
Thanks, John, it's great to be back.
Glad to have you on. So we spoke in the middle of June, and you explained how some states were prioritizing mail-in ballots for older Americans, and how you were saying that violates some equal protection considerations of access to the vote. I know that we're going to give updates, but just in case people weren't familiar with that first interview, can you quickly explain what the concerns are?
Sure. Well, it's not just equal protection, actually. Equal protection is a broad constitutional principle that means that the government has to treat similarly situated individuals equally broadly. But with respect to a lot of types of factors, the explanation the government gives for treating different people differently just has to be rational. So the question is there more that has to be done for certain types of discrimination? Now, most people know that race is something. You can't just, discriminate between African Americans and Caucasians and say, well, it's rational to do that, or I've got some reason to do it. There's got to be a really, really good, compelling reason to do that. Essentially, the government can never do it because of specific constitutional provisions. Now, the interesting thing is, this is true too with respect to age in voting. And that's because the 26th Amendment, which goes beyond equal protection, says that the government, when it comes to the right to vote for citizens 18 or over, cannot discriminate, deny, or abridge the right to vote specifically, quote, on account of age. So age kind of becomes like race, and it's a no-go for discrimination in voting.
Interesting. And I assume that many people, upon hearing about this debate, this consideration, would say that reason that you earlier alluded to would be that older Americans are at a significantly greater risk of serious complications from COVID-19, including death, which we know statistically is true, but we also know that right now in the debate about sending kids back to school, we're continually reminding people that they can still get the virus and they can still die from the virus and potentially have long-term consequences from it as well. And so sending younger Americans out to potentially get sick or even die seems like a bad idea as well. All people deserve to be protected from the virus.
No question. The issue that every expert has said is not about particular vulnerable populations per se. It's about avoiding large social gatherings for everyone, because that's how it spreads. And then people go back and interact with their parents, with their grandparents, with their teachers, with their colleagues. And that's what we're trying to prevent, right? I don't think anyone is saying that it's just like we have to force younger voters to go to the polls and then let older voters stay home because it's the polls themselves that are just gonna kill people. No, it's waiting in line, it's gathering, it's spreading the disease broadly, and that applies to everyone. So that's point one. And then just the second point that I'll add is that is a little bit, the states that are relying on this to sort of say, let's make it much, much easier for folks 65 and older to vote, that's relying on some outdated CDC guidance. So the medical professionals have updated their guidance and they don't make a particular age distinction anymore and say above this line, it's really risky, below this line, you're pretty good. Instead, the new guidance is the risk increases with age. So 36, more heightened risk than 26, 46 more heightened than 36. There's no border where you're safe or you're not. So everyone has this concern.
So it's been about 6 to 8 weeks since we last spoke. So you mentioned some legal challenges at the state level the last time we spoke. How have those things proceeded since then?
Yeah, so they're moving along. Unfortunately, since we last spoke, there was a challenge in Texas that we spoke a little bit about, because Texas has a really extreme version of this, where everyone 65 and older in Texas doesn't even need an excuse. They can just write to their county and say, I would like to vote by absentee ballot, and they're allowed. And then if you're 64 or younger, they have basically the most onerous mail ballot restrictions in the country, where COVID is not an excuse. And not only that, but it's the most onerous excuse for even being away or working on election day. because in Texas, and this is pretty extraordinary, not only do you have to say I'll be away on election day, November 3rd, if you're under 65, but you have to say I will be away and unable to vote, maybe because I'm working out of the county or something, on every single day of early voting, starting on October 19th. And then they can only mail you a ballot outside the county. So basically they have to say, prove it. So Texas brought this really good challenge to say, hey, this is a humongous difference between people 65 and 35. There was a dissent from Justice Sotomayor who said, we really should take a closer look at this. And it's still been emergency litigation, so there's no final decision. But right now, those advocates haven't gotten the law changed. We, since we last spoke, filed a case in Alaska because they're doing something a little more subtle, but I think equally impactful, which is they decided to mail absentee ballot applications to every voter 65 and older in Alaska and leave voters younger than 65 sort of out to their own devices to figure out how to get an absentee ballot. So people under 65 in Alaska and many other states can still get a ballot. It's not being put to them on a platter like it is for older voters. Yeah. And so we challenged that in court, and we're headed for an emergency injunction hearing on August 25th. So we should know in early September whether or not the courts are going to resolve that one and make the state at least send a postcard or send something to everyone else and say, hey, here are your options. Here's what to do, and not just make it so much easier for those 65 and older voters to vote by mail than for younger voters.
So that one conceivably could be changed in time to have an effect on the election.
Could be changed. I'm optimistic about it. The courts, candidly, are a little more favorable in Alaska. An appeal would go to the Ninth Circuit, which tends to be a little more favorable to voting rights than the appeals courts in Texas. And I also think they tend to be a little more reasonable in Alaska, right? They do have some nice, robust voting options in Alaska, and I think they want to make it easy. They just decided to do this illegal discrimination and make it more difficult for those younger than 65 to figure out how to vote by mail. So our plaintiffs in that case are, folks in the Alaska Native community and folks in the disability community saying, hey, where are we? It's really hard for us to vote too, and you didn't do anything for us. Is it a coincidence that the people 65 and older in Alaska tend to be whiter, tend to be a little more of one political party or one political persuasion? I don't know if that's only a coincidence or not, but regardless, the state needs to treat everyone equally on the basis of age when it comes to voting.
Now, both in this interview and the last time you were on the Damage Report, we talked about a number of different states. Outside of those states where you've either launched lawsuits or there are still ones pending, they haven't been resolved yet. Have you seen much? Like, are there a lot of states that are doing significant changes to make it easier to mail and vote? And if so, are you seeing cases where it is fairly agnostic to age? Like, are there parts of the country where it's going to be easier than in past elections, even if you don't happen to be over 65?
Absolutely, this is the good news. I don't want to come on here and only say bad news. There really is good news, which is that depending on exactly how you interpret certain laws and statutes and what's going to happen over the next weeks, we're looking at probably 40, 41, 42 states where anyone who wants to vote by mail can vote by mail regardless of age. It's really a deep minority. Texas, Louisiana, unfortunately, Mississippi, Kentucky, which we can talk a little bit about, that are putting the thumb on the scale in favor of older voters. There's a couple of in-between states, John. So Tennessee, viewers may have, who follow this thing closely, may have seen a decision from the Tennessee Supreme Court that sort of split the difference on COVID voting by mail and said that anyone at a heightened risk of COVID or who lives with someone with a heightened risk can automatically vote by mail. It didn't define heightened, and it also said it's on the honor system and you don't need a doctor's note. So as I read that, anyone who just wants to prevent COVID and thinks that they have any more than a nominal risk of having severe complications, which I think is everyone, can request an absentee ballot there. So that's why I say it's a little unclear what number to put on, but it's most of the country will be able to vote by mail. And it's important, it'll be important to do that early, right? Because there's going to be a huge flood. So folks who want to do that should go on the relevant websites and start applying as early as you can. Let the mail be as slow as it's going to be, and you know your vote will still count because you're super early.
Yeah, I like that, not defining the heightened risk. I mean, if we're allowed to define it for ourselves, I would say all Americans in comparison to the rest of the world are at a fairly heightened risk.
Good point.
And I'm glad that you point out the states where they're doing the right thing in this area. But I don't want people to get complacent and think, well, we're winning in some philosophical sense. The states that you've pointed out that are not doing the right thing, these are some of the states that in almost every question of access to voting, they're generally historically on the wrong side of things, especially when there's not enough oversight. And so I'm glad that you're helping to provide that, and that these lawsuits are happening in some of these states that are already like Georgia and Texas and Louisiana. They crack down on voting rights in particular partisan and racially biased ways. And that's been true for as long as they've been states. So I'm glad that you're doing that work, and we appreciate you coming back on the show and updating us on the progress.
Of course, yeah, no, that is an unfortunate reality, and this in many ways goes back to a 2013 decision by the Supreme Court that got rid of the extra protections that people had in those states that historically discriminated in voting. And that's really, if people are looking back and saying, how did we get here? I think a lot of people point to Citizens United in 2010, add in Shelby County in 2013, which would sort of let these rogue states kind of to their own devices.
Yeah. Well, definitely let us know when another one of these big decisions ends up coming through, and we can talk about it on the show.
Sounds great. Look forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Be well.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.